Okay, we're live. I'm attorney Vincent Davis, and this is The Secret, How to Fight CPS and Win. And we're joined this evening by three very special guests. Miss Cassandra Woodard. How are you this evening, Cassandra?
I'm good.
Good to see you. And then we have, of course, Miss Georgette Truen. Miss G, how are you this evening?
Great.
Good to see you. And we have another guest. Hold on a second. I've lost control. Okay, there we are. Mr. Jason, is it Leger?
Leisure, yes.
Leisure, okay. How are you?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
Doing good. What state are you in?
Minnesota, Minneapolis.
Minnesota.
Mhm.
You know, your state was trying to pass a law that would preserve the familial rights when a child lost their parental rights through a CPS case. Did you ever hear anything about that?
You know, I hadn't. I know that there was a tragic incident a number of years back. The county that my case was involved in, actually, a young boy was tragically lost his life, but it resulted in the entire state revamping all of its laws for all 86 counties. So it was a pretty big deal. So a complete overhaul of our CPS system, in fact.
Well, this was actually going to change a law. Like right now in California and in Minnesota, if you're a grandparent and the mother loses her parental rights, all right, you no longer are a grandparent.
Right.
Minnesota was proposing a law that didn't pass that would stop that. So if the parental rights were taken away, the grandparents were still the grandparents. The aunts and uncles were still the aunts and uncles. The cousins were still the cousins. But the law didn't pass, and now it's still the same, as it used to be. But there's a gentleman in Minnesota who's very active. I don't think he's a lawyer. I think he was a parent who got, they tried to give him the royal shaft there in Minnesota, and he really organized a bunch of people. I forget his name. African-American guy, probably about 45 years old.
I know who you're speaking of.
He has a website.
Yeah, he's got a big following.
Yeah, he has a training that he offers, and he's really made lemonade out of lemons. But he's very active in trying to change laws there in Minnesota. Anyway,
I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but if I do, I'll definitely bring him up.
Okay, very good. So why don't you tell me, Jason, how you are associated with CPS?
Well, in my case, I was the non-offending, non-custodial parent. I had established my rights about 5 years before my daughter was born, or before this case had begun when she was born. And my daughter was the oldest of three kids. The younger two had each separate fathers as well, both of whom hadn't established their rights. The county that removed my child due to drug use between the mom and the third child's father, and never bothered to notify me. That was kind of the first step in the whole process, that I realized that as a parent, as a non-custodial parent especially, I was basically set on a back burner. It was not until I was actually sent a bill for $1,500 for the guardian ad litem that I was made aware of this case. It was 2 hours from my home in a different county, and then when I was made aware of it, they treated me more like the offending parent than any. And I had been suing for custody due to the mom's disappearance with my daughter. So it was which I had to stop. It was just a complete nightmare, and that's really where mine began. And I learned a great deal. It's been a struggle for about more than 10 years now. It's something that never goes away. And my daughter will bear the scars of what they've done for the rest of her life. And we've still, we've had our time back uninterrupted now for a little over 5 years, and we're still seeing the follow-up from this, and it's going to be a lifelong consequence. She's actually moved out of state due to some circumstances surrounding this. And so what I advocate for now is for other parents not to have to go through what I did. And so that familial bond that you spoke of not being broken is not only important, but I think what we're missing here is the fact that these kids are being uprooted from the only home they know, and many of them age out of these systems with nothing and nobody, and when they could have a plethora of family and people that are behind them, and it's all designed. There's a unmistakable and undeniable cohesion to how they railroad families, and it's not something that we can overlook any longer. I think it's something that is going to be it's going to take a major tragedy, and it's taken several already, but none of them have made it to the forefront to the point where our nation is listening. I mean, we might get a little bit of coverage here and a little bit there, but it's not nearly to the point where we should be as concerned as we really should be as a nation for what we're doing.
How old is your daughter right now?
She's 12, going to be 13.
So do you still have contact with her and visitation and all that?
Yeah, I do. I was giving back my parenting time. Mom had historically alienated me throughout my daughter's life. That's now come to an end. She's kind of seen the error of her ways, and it took our daughter suffering to get her there. But after all of said and done, I've had my time uninterrupted for 5 years now, and it's been the longest time we've had together uninterrupted. So it's my daughter's excelled exponentially since she's had her time with her dad back. We've always had a close bond. Her mom wasn't very stable, so what I had to offer her for stability was really kind of what got her through in her early years. So she was comfortable and familiar with one place that she could go, and that was her dad's. So that was a very big deal for her.
Jason, when I first started doing these CPS, also known as juvenile dependency cases in Los Angeles County, if you walked into court and you were a non-offending, usually non-custodial parent, it was almost automatic that you got the child placed with you. Now, that was in January of 1989 when I started doing these cases. And over the years, you know what I've noticed? I've noticed a trend where some social workers come up with arguments to keep the child away from the non-offending, non-custodial father. And it is so foreign to me because of just the way I was trained and I was brought up. I remember one of the first judges that I used to appear in front of, would say, the guy's non-offending. You haven't made any allegations against him. I have to give him his child.
Right.
And that was just, the law of the road.
Right.
And now today, people tell me, well, I'm non-offending, and they took the kid and placed the kid in foster care. I see real struggle sometimes with these non-offending parents getting the child back, and they can't understand. I can't explain it to them,
Right.
because they're asking me, well, what's the law? Well, the law is,
Can I touch on something that you're really important there? That even in my state, for example, the non-offending non-custodial parent, myself in particular, when I went in there, I wasn't even given standing in the court, which is immensely huge. I had to ask for I had to petition the court to basically become a party. I was considered a participant. And so that meant I couldn't even motion the court for my daughter if I wanted to. And given the strict timelines in CPS, and that's something that I've really come to understand greatly, is that the timelines are designed to specifically thwart parents from getting their children back in favor of CPS, kind of navigating away without having to, for example, serve the petition upon the parents. And even if they do serve the petition, it's not going to be timely on the removal. I mean, you get a 72-hour removal, the law says they don't have to give it to you ahead of time. So you're going into court not even knowing the complaints against you. And so, and that's just on the front end. And you likely don't even have an attorney within 72 hours. Most parents do not. So even if they did have all these things, the deck's already stacked against them. And if you're the non-offending, non-custodial parent, you still have to know that you have to petition the court and ask them. Otherwise, you can talk until you're blue in the face, and the court is not required to even hear you. And so whatever you say or do, it's moot. And parents would never know that unless they had legal training, which most don't. And so that's the disconnect. The law is not family oriented. It's oriented toward destroying the family and separating.
California has something similar. You have to be deemed a presumed father to have, all the rights. Now, in California, there's maybe 5 or 6 different types of fathers. So we've taken this concept of what is a father. We're way out there. So there's the biological father, there's the presumed father, there's all these different types of fathers, and only the presumed father has full rights in the CPS case. Notice I didn't say biological father. A lot of people go to court and say, hey, I'm the biological father. And most people will look at you like, so what? What's that got to do with anything? Which is so foreign to me, because to me, father is the biological father, but that's not how the law is geared towards in California. And if you walk in there and you're not a presumed father, or the judge doesn't give you presumed father status, you may be SOL. Like you said, you're just there flapping your mouth and nobody's paying attention because you don't matter.
Right. And in my case, that was definitely highlighted because the court had actually explained that to dad number 3, because he was present. He was involved in the circumstances for the removal. He had explained that to that father, and then the county attorney actually turned after that explanation in open court when he said, you're a participant, and stated that she didn't know the custodial designations of all 3 fathers, although the petition had named us each individually as the father. So it was kind of their ruse in order to keep us from asserting our rights. But I wasn't notified even then, and I wouldn't be notified for a month after my daughter's removal. So go ahead.
It's apparent to me you've given this a lot of thought and then a lot of analysis.
Over a decade. Yeah.
Did you figure these things out on your own? And if you did, how long did it take you?
It took me several years, but I have a little bit of OCD. So when they had my daughter, the only thing that kept me from going back, I'm also in recovery. I've been sober for 13 years just before she was born. And the thing that kept me in the fight was that I was always fighting toward her and never kind of let that wane. So I was studying daily, almost incessantly. So it took me several years, probably 6 years, just to get to the point where I understood the basic concepts of the law. And I read more case law than most one else. And I did that for a long time. And my understanding, it took time to grow.
So tell people what a 1L is.
A first-year law student, basically. So that's I basically from my understanding, first-year law students, that's really what they do, is they build case law books, and they IRAC cases and basically break down the issue, rule, conclusion, analysis, the whole thing. And so it gives them an understanding of legal reasoning and how the judge and courts think. And so I had to do that from my couch because I couldn't afford the formal training, but I did the best I could with what I had. And Google Scholar was huge. And in the 3 dictionary were the 2 main staples that I leaned on for that. So
you use Google Scholar.
Well, yeah, because it allows you to break down your courts, so you can basically take your state, federal, local courts, all that broken down, at least the case law from the higher courts, the Supreme Court as well, and you can mix and match any of those so that you get case law that's pertinent to what your situation is, and you can basically section out the courts that you don't need, or even if you need more legal understanding, you can include those just so that you get a wider range of legal argument, because it's going to be similar in all, but the ones that have precedence are going to be the ones in your district. Your higher courts, your appellate courts, your Supreme Court, and your state Supreme Court, that kind of thing. So,
if I were a person that was interested in Google Scholar, how would I find it?
You just type Scholar into your search bar. It's quite simple, and it's easy to kind of add those courts and take away the ones that you don't want to, which is kind of nice. It's very, very user friendly. But I would suggest, if you do go that route, be prepared, because what you read 1 month will be different in 30 days, and in 90 days it'll be a world different, because it takes time to build that understanding. But once you do, you'll see the breakthroughs yourself. You'll start to understand more about the case law that you're reading, and it becomes a whole new story as you go on. If you look at it in a way that the law would have you look at it, for example. So I know when I started out, I didn't understand any of it, and I muddled through it. And in 30 days, it was a completely different story. And if I read it today, it would be a world away. So you learn a great deal.
So in your experience with CPS, were there any, we talk about social workers that don't or aren't truthful. We talk about possible corruption. We talk about a lot of different things, discrimination, prejudices, all that type of thing. Did you experience any of that during your case?
Unfortunately, yeah. And the main thing that hinges on mine was that the social services investigator, I was actually the first of two callers to CPS 6 months before removal. And the case was opened and closed within an hour that I had called. And I learned years later that that there was a second caller 3 weeks after mine, and that the investigator had offered mom services, which she declined. Now, this could have saved us 6 months on the front end of those children living in an environment of drug use and that aspect. But on the back end, what it really did was it allowed the same social service investigator to continually be a part of this, but never notify me and claim not to know where I was, even though my information was clearly in the system. I was in the same home for 7 years. But that was their way to work around the one father who did have his parental rights, and which was me. And so they waited to notify me, while the other two, they bent over backwards to involve, because they could set a child support case against them and then collect that money and not have to remit it to mom, because it would be then the counties if they had the kids in custody. So that's another way that they take the money. But in my case, the same social services investigator was involved at every stage. Even mom had made several accusations against me in order to protect her custody. And on the back end, years after all of this began, 2 years after the CHIPS case had begun, right as they were reunifying with mom, she made a second false allegation, which cost me 3 years of time with my daughter. But during the interview, that social service investigator offered to help my county of jurisdiction, which is 2 hours away. Like I said, my daughter no longer lived in the county there. And the only thing that tied us there was that open CHIPS case against mom that they were reunifying with. And that social services investigator offered this detective here to help by doing the forensic interview of my daughter, her mother, and her grandmother. And during that interview, when my daughter was trying to tell him truthfully her truth, he physically intimidated my 5-year-old to say that her father had harmed her, which we have now known that it's come out that I didn't do it, but she was actually being harmed by mom's live-in boyfriend, which he was required by law to assess what men were living in the home with the child at the time, and he failed to do that. He basically attributed all of mom's points from her meth case to me in order to keep my daughter from me, while simultaneously reunifying with mom, when he was the one that wrote that petition to remove the child from my ex. So they knew full well what they were doing, and it was right in their scope. But they used that they manipulated it to further their purpose, their gains. And I was the only father who showed up to all of his visits. I was prepared. Where mom had the kids back within 2 months, I had 2 months of phone time with my daughter, followed by 4 months of intensive supervised visits, where it's all documented. It's been, I mean, to say I was treated disparately would be an understatement, and it was criminal, in my opinion. There's a lot to unpack.
Have you ever thought about writing a book?
I've tried to put this down a lot, but like I said, the OCD kind of keeps me from putting it all down. It's all in here, but it's a jumble. It's hard to separate the emotional aspect from the.
What if I were to help you? Would you be interested in doing that?
Absolutely, I would.
I encourage people sometimes to do that, to write a book, because it becomes a little cathartic, little therapeutic. I mean, getting it all out and then being able to share it with people so that, they may help other people. I don't think I've ever mentioned this to Miss G or to Miss Cassandra, but I would wholeheartedly tell both of you, consider writing a book. I've written several books, had them published, and I think that's one of the most valuable things or useful things I've done in my life. I wrote a book on, how to fight CPS, and I can't tell you the number of people that contact me because of that book and say, hey, thank you for the book. It helped me immensely. And my book is nothing sophisticated, believe me. I wrote it for parents and relatives, just to give them an overview of what's going on, because you're entering into a system and your only reference may be your criminal case or your family law case or your, lawsuit against your business partner or something like that. And this courtroom and these courts have nothing to do with that. They're totally separate and different and foreign. So you're comparing apples and oranges, and you're thinking you're understanding the same thing. I wanted to tell you about something kind of similar to yours, and this happened many years ago. Um, this guy came to my office, and he was a Navy SEAL, an ex-Navy SEAL in um, Vietnam, like one of the first Navy SEALs. And he had a child, and over the years, the mother, disappeared on him, and he couldn't find the mother. And eventually, the mother caught a CPS case, and they took the child away from the mother. They never notified him. But on the flip side, the county was suing him for child support.
Mhm.
Now, they sued him for child support, but they never told him about the CPS case.
Right.
It resulted in a huge lawsuit against the county, which I believe they settled favorably for a huge amount of money. Um, and, if they know where you are, they're supposed to give you notice. In this particular case, the kid was in some group home or some foster home, languishing. And
Mhm.
he was there ready and willing and able to take the kid, had been looking for the kid to try to have visitation with the child, but no one told him about the CPS case.
That's almost exactly on par with mine. In fact, in the register of actions on my case, the county clerk entered in there stating that I was at the address on file waiting to be served, and they still refused to serve me. But they claimed, and they also testified under oath in two different courtrooms, one in administrative appeal that I successfully appealed, a maltreatment determination, but where they stated that they just had no idea where I was, and that's flat out not true because of not only that, but about 7 other reasons, and then including again the county attorney attempted to mislead the court as to the law when they stated that they didn't know the custodial statuses of us fathers. Only in my regard, though, because with the other 2 fathers, they did everything they could to have them involved because one had a warrant for his arrest and the other one was, either way, they could both be adjudicated for child support, and then that goes to the county. But for me, I was only notified after the guardian ad litem wanted $1,500 for her services, and she hadn't even met my daughter yet. So that was how I was finally notified. Was I received a bill for $1,500, and that's literally how they notified me of this whole thing. I wasn't even given the petition until moments before I walked into court, and that was actually stamped to be mailed out that day after I would have already been in default. So
Yeah, I think
it's a
the way the case I was telling you about, they sued him for child support to reimburse the county for the foster care that they were paying, the group home or the foster parents. And it's like, what? You know where she is?
right.
Because you're trying
That's
to make me pay for it? So we talked about the book. And also I mentioned the book to Miss G and Miss Cassandra, because one of the things that over the years in doing these cases, I've realized is everyone's story is similar, but it's different. And they each have lessons that they should share with people out there. There was a movie released, seems like maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago. A documentarian did a movie on CPS Los Angeles County. Did you happen to see this movie?
I didn't know.
Okay. It was entered into several film festivals, but the guy who did the movie was he did a lot of different documentaries, and he just chose this one as CPS. When the movie came out, I had forgotten about it, but he interviewed me along with a few other attorneys. He came to my office one day and interviewed me for several hours, and I had forgotten all about it. And then one day I got an email from one of the other attorneys who was in the movie and said, "Hey, Vince, the premiere of the movie is down at the Staples Center in Los Angeles on such and such a date." And I was kind of shocked. And but what I'm trying to say is I asked him if he was going to continue doing these about different families going through the system. And he told me that he was not, because this wasn't his thing. CPS wasn't his thing. He just did documentaries on different things in life. But he told me, he says, I'll give you the formula on how to make a good documentary, and you do them.
Hmm.
He says, you have enough content and enough victims from all over the United States to tell their story. It's expensive to do a documentary. I don't know if you know this. When he came to my office that day, he had 4 people that he rented out, like basically a movie crew, and the sound, the lights, the camera, everything, and it was quite expensive, and I don't know if he ever recouped that money by selling tickets to this movie, but it was only I think it only made it to different film festivals all over the country.
Hmm.
I have a colleague who's not a lawyer, but he made a documentary of his life and his the work he was doing, and he entered it probably into 200 or 300 film festivals all over the world. So, if you're interested in the book and perhaps a documentary, I'd be happy to help you.
I would definitely like to look into that. Part of my work now is I did create a Facebook page. It's about 2,000 members right now, and it grows daily. But it's CPS, Children and Parents Speak Up, geared toward family court and CPS reform. My fight is not done. It's just started. I realize that there's a need here, and I'm not one to walk away from that. I think that it's more than a pressing need. It's an urgent, or it's past an urgent need. Even it's critical. And if our nation doesn't right this, it's going to be something that is going to destroy us from within. And I think that the problem that we're not addressing here is that this isn't just a problem now. When I did my research, for example, I went back and I found pages like mine, very similar, from the infancy of the internet, with great content and information that would be pertinent even today, because this system has not changed in that amount of time. And this is antiquated beyond measure, and it's what we use to basically destroy families, and it's beyond its scope. It's far beyond anything that any one person can tackle, and it's so big that it's going to take something drastic. And I think I have an idea of what that is, and but it's going to take everybody, and I'm talking business owners and people from that generation with the good content that just simply walked away from their pages. I mean, one day there's just an entry and then it's done, and which is a sad thing to think, because these people are fighting the same fight that I'm fighting, and the people in my groups are fighting, in the groups like mine that are numerous across the internet right now, that are active in thousands of people, and they're all fighting, but they're separately fighting, and that's kind of what they want. They basically call you from the herd if you're poor or low income, and you're a target. They don't do this in Beverly Hills. They don't do this to wealthy families or anybody that can fight back. They go after the people that can't. But the reality is when they do this, they're also fleecing the middle class, because it's all coming out of our Social Security dollars. This is where our Social Security money has been squandered, and they force these agencies to spend every dime. Otherwise, they lose their funding the next biennium or the next annual recoupment. So there's more here than just one little case, or even 10 cases. This is a systemic issue that affects our entire middle class and our poor. And that's on the whole. The entire nation pays for this. And it's not just here. Go ahead.
You're right. You're very right, Jason. But there's one thing you forgot to mention, that when they put the children, they always have to put them in a foster home. And they get most of their incentives when their children are placed in a foster home. If the children are with family member as placement, then they want the family member, the aunt, the uncle, whoever, to become a foster parent, so they can have more control over them. They twist the truth. I mean, I literally had to print pages of information I took today from callers, and it is sad that one of the callers is a pastor. They took all his kids, him and his wife, because his 16-year-old daughter went to the hospital to get checked. And in Mississippi, they have girls can marry at age 16 and up, right? So it's lawful in Mississippi with the parental approval, correct? So
Sure.
the pastor, who is the father, married the daughter and her husband, and she went to the hospital so she can be able to have kids because she's been married for a long time, for like 6 months, and she couldn't get pregnant. And then so the doctor, because of her age, reported her to the Department of Child Services. So they went after the father and said that the father is using her as sex traffic her.
Yeah,
And he's a pastor. He's involved with the church, with homelessness, with he literally preaches and feeds the homeless and makes sure that everybody's taken care of that can't afford to eat. But yet they're slamming him with this. And the social worker kept evidence from the courts and you name it.
right.
And it happens everywhere. Whether
Right.
you're a father, whether you're a mother, it doesn't matter. But
I've heard them go after the attorneys too,
Mhm.
like the attorneys of families that are fighting. They'll go after that attorney's family, and CPS will take their kids as well, or their
Oh yeah,
siblings' kids.
yes.
There's no shame. Yeah,
No shame. No, and nurses. And by the way, you say before they would target, the low class or the not the middle class and the poor or what have you. But now they're targeting nurses.
right.
Nurses. I have gotten 2 calls from nurses whose children are taken away from them,
Hmm.
and
Absolutely.
they don't do drugs. They don't have criminal record. They don't understand why they would steal their child from them, and they're
Right.
all newborn. And somehow they give you something when you have a C-section, whatever drug they're given, um, and then all of a sudden they have drugs in the system.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, and it's not supposed to, because I think it's what we're missing is that this is by design. This is not something that is an accident. What we're looking at here is it's them preying on the weak and the poor, the middle class, because it's a form of social control, and that's really what it boils down to. And when you control the children, you really control the family, and that's in the timeline. Everything that I explain, to my understanding, and everything that I've learned. There's a subtle design, and the reason I say this is because when I began, I remember speaking to an attorney, and this woman does fight CPS. She's one of the few that I found, but she was so backlogged she couldn't help me. She's hard pressed to help the people that she does help, but I said, I remember saying distinctly, I don't think this is a conspiracy, because I didn't want her to think that I was nuts. Because in my mind, and most people that deal with social workers, in their minds, they think people are going to think they're nuts because there's a stigma associated with the term social work. We look at them as altruistic. We look at them as giving, caring people that are doing the best they can for society. So when you run afoul of a social worker, people's first response is, what did you do wrong? So when we look at that, we say, okay, and it's gotten so bad that even, for example, the state of Minnesota has coined that term. Social worker has to be a member who works for a city government or a state organization. It cannot be a private worker. It's so they've taken that term and really coined it. But what it does is it creates this error that people don't have a voice to speak against that kind of thing, and because they're afraid of that stigma, and that stigma is very real, even if you've been involved in this. So when I said, I don't think this is a conspiracy, she says, I wouldn't be so sure of that. And at the time, it didn't register with me, but years later, that rang really true in my ears, and I thought, she was trying to tell me something, just like a whole bunch of instances that I missed because I was too close to it at the time to see. But there's a very real agenda here that is not. It sounds like it's a conspiracy theory, but in truth, anybody that gets close enough to this, they realize that this isn't a conspiracy theory at all. That's why we have podcasts like this and pages like mine in the thousands, and people in the tens of thousands and the millions that should be hitting these pages. And for some reason, the numbers are skewed, and I think that we're separated just enough to keep us exactly like we are, in a little disarray. So the more that we get the word out, I think the better. I think the more we connect, the better.
That
So
is, I agree. I totally agree. And there's a lot of victims. Like there's mothers who actually, this other lady, she got stuck in traffic and her car broke down. She has 5 children. Her husband died. So she's a single mom. And
mhm,
then she called the police for help just to transport her to the house.
mhm,
The police kept asking her, "Oh, where's your husband?" She said, "My husband died." "Oh, how many kids you have?" Then she's talking to the cops. She's thankful for them, but they're asking her a lot of questions. Before you know it, they reported her to Child Protective Services.
mhm.
Why? She has no idea. She
Right.
has no idea why.
And then that's the timeline as well. I mean, when we look at these petitions, you think that within 72 hours you have to go and answer for whatever they say on that petition. You don't even have an attorney with you. You don't even know what you're being accused of, and they've pushed this timeline up. And this timeline is the biggest thing to them. And it's a one size fits all for every case. It doesn't matter if it's a neglect case or if it's a severe abuse case. It's the timeline, the timeline, the timeline. Well, what that does, that allows the county to make their claims against you and give you no room to argue because you don't even know what they're accusing you of. So basically, the county lays out this whole argument, and your response is nuh-uh. And then the guardian ad litem says, yeah, I agree with the social worker because they've made an argument. You've just said nuh-uh, and that's really what you get for your argument. Yeah. At the end of the day, you're basically backed into that corner, and the judge says, well, I have to consider this. I've got this social worker and this guardian ad litem. They're professionals, and they've said this, and you've really given me nothing, so I've got to go with them at least for another 8 to 10 days, and until that second hearing is required because of the timeline again. And so by the time you get to that point, you're far past when you should have been looking at the warrant for the removal and that kind of thing. You're far past that. So the court's not going to circle back to that for you at a later date and say, oh, you know what, they were wrong for removing, when they've created this whole slew of new allegations based on what they've gotten from your children, for example, after they've removed them, basically removed their Miranda rights if they had them, or the right to self-incrimination altogether, because it's not like Mr. Davis said, it's not like a criminal case at all. You don't have those rights. They're not present.
Well,
So,
I'm
sorry.
falling in love with you right now. I wish you can just be I wish you're a court-appointed. What do you call it? A CPS attorney right now, like literally right now. Jason, you'll be a great attorney. A great attorney.
You. I appreciate that.
You have the passion. You're amazing. Wow.
Jason, are you going to law school right now?
No, I'm not. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. I made some mistakes as a young man, but I've been, like I said, sober for 13 years, and I'm kind of spinning my wheels. Honestly, I'm working construction, and then I do this on my free time, all of my free time, as much as I can. So I've devoted my life to this.
When you were involved in the CPS system, what's the biggest thing that you would change if you could wave a magic wand? What would you change?
Plain language, family rule, and law. I think that we have to start, when we see families in turmoil, the first thing should not be to confuse them and put them into a place where they're pitted against each other. I think that's really taken from the old Roman Latin, where we have to have a fight, a Colosseum basically, and two are going to go in and one's going to leave. Mm-hmm. And that's in the family law, and that's in the CPS law. And I think that they need to get away from that, because when we're talking about the best interest of anybody, children or families, it's not to pit them against each other. It's to remove that thing that is separating them and try to sew together what has worked and what can still work, because that's the only reason we're going to create a cohesive unit moving forward, and that's the best interest of the children no matter what. And that's to have both parents in some capacity and in the best capacity that we can put them on, and not see that whatever savings they have squandered between whatever attorneys and judges and counties can get their piece of it. So I think that's the biggest thing: plain language, family rule, and law. And that's what my page is dedicated to changing. So,
all right.
I think,
totally admire you, Jason. I really,
thank you.
Really do. They're idiots not to see you for who you are. This is very sad. I was actually telling Davis on the show the other day that I grew up with both my parents, and I was very close to my father. My mom used to call me his shadow. If my dad was on a business trip, all I have to do is call him and cry to him and tell him I miss him, and he'll leave everything and come. That's how close my dad and I were. So when they strip families apart, I don't get it. Or when there's a conflict in a marriage and the husband doesn't want to pay child support, then they trashes the wife, or he sets her up to fail, and vice versa. Women do the same thing to men. So I don't see the dynamic. Why does this have to happen? Why can't you guys just raise them together and stop reporting the father, and the father stop reporting the mom, and just raise the children together? And I don't understand why it has to result to this.
That's the social control. When they create that wedge in the family, that allows the room for the county and the state to come in and do their work, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And believe it or not, my daughter's mother just this last week, she actually apologized for decades of this, and she's 10 years younger than me, and she's kind of finally gotten to that place. And I never expected this. she was a bit of a narcissist and an alienator historically, but she's gotten to that point where she sees that the benefits to my daughter far outweigh whatever grievance she would have had back when we were together. And so she's come a different route, but it took her to leave state, and I had to come to grips with that too, because she's moved to an adjacent state, but just recently. And my problem is that I had to let that go, because I know that it's not to alienate me this time. I think that we've gotten past that, but I had to do that as a best interest for my daughter. And when I look back, I think that is the only thing that's seen me through this, is that I've always been focused on what she needs. And if I stay there, then I'm not into what hurts me, or what's gonna do me justice or give me justice, because I'm not, that's not what I'm here for in the end. And it's a hard place to be, because it's in some ways it's self-deprecating. It's very harmful to yourself. And if you don't have those outlets, it can consume you. And so I had to find, this was my outlet, was to learn. And I realized as a 9th grade dropout that I'm still teachable, that I still have more to offer, and that if I give this a shot, that, good things are going to come of this. And I knew at the time that I was studying, it wasn't going to help me in time. I knew that it wasn't for me. And that was kind of the other reconciliation that I had to have, because in the end, it wasn't going to be for me. But all of that was restored anyway, because I've gotten more than I ever thought I would have in this relationship. And she said that, my ex, for example, said, you can come to this house and pick up your daughter anytime you want. And it doesn't matter. And that's something that 6 years ago, I never thought would happen. So the world does change for you if you open the door.
But
so
narcissist if she was a narcissist, she would never admit to that.
And she is, but she had to get rid of, she had to leave. The reason she left was to leave a bigger narcissist. And that was the other person involved in this whole thing. And that's her mother, but I don't want to say names. And once she got out from under that, her ability to flourish kind of came out. So she got to heal a little bit, and it happens that quick. And ironically, when you're not under that control, that coercive control, you can start to see some of the truth. And it doesn't take very long before it kind of sheds off of you. And I think that could be for a lot of people.
Yeah, she was controlled. She was controlled by a mother. Her mother probably set everything up for her to do.
She did.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it works. I mean, we all chose the wrong partners, one way or another. However, when you marry somebody or you get involved with somebody, you're also marrying their mother, unfortunately. And if she's a narcissistic piece of shit, that's the fruit of her labor. I mean, of her womb. That's what you got involved with.
Right.
And,
that's who she learned from. Yeah, that's what she learned. Yeah, that's she tried her own form of it, and it didn't really work out. She was a terrible witness even for herself. So in the end, it all came true. It came to light. But the suffering doesn't have to be so prolonged for people involved, and the kids especially. But it's funny that you say that, and even her mom has apologized since, and because our daughter suffered immensely because of these actions, and they had to see that, they had to see the damage that was caused there, and it was a very emotional thing, and it's very recent for us. We'll just say that the person that harmed her got 177 months for what he did on her testimony. And so that's part of the reason for the move. But there's that's where my anger lies, is in wanting that retribution. And that's where my sense of duty lies to other people, because I feel like I failed in my own regard. But when I look at my relationship, I see what's built up, and I can see that I can be of service or benefit to others by helping them stop that before it happens for them and their children.
And what's so sad, you say that, and I think that, and I really do try to tell people, to the point where I sound like I'm pushing them, but I'm really trying to get them to understand the social worker is giving you false hope. It's not going to change. That false hope is to trap you, because the first move they have to do is to separate the families apart. They have to separate the dad to get through to the mom, because the fathers are usually the protectors.
Right.
So the dad, my dad was always the protector, because he was always the head of the household. My mom understood that, but they had a beautiful marriage. But now what they aim for is to separate the family. Separate the family so they can target the mom and the kids, because the mother is the weakest link. Mothers are normally emotional.
Right.
Fathers, they feel the pain, but they hold it together.
we're seeing that with Roe, with the repeal
Yeah.
of Roe. You're hitting that right on the head, and that's it, with the entire shakeup of that system. What we're understanding is that mothers are starting to see that this is not about them specifically. It's about keeping that separation, because when they do that, they have the financial control over both the mom and the dad. As soon as they separate you, they have financial control by child support for the dad. But then if the mom goes and asks for even one bit of support from the state or the county, she's required to sign over all future support owed, not future support in an amount equal to what she's taken, but all future support owed. And then in the 1984 Deficit Reduction Act, for example, she's the state's pass-through amount. They were required by Congress to pass through the first $50, and they threw such a fit, the states did, about having to pass through the first $50, that they made these single mothers sue for that money that they were owed. That's what the state truly looks at child support for, and that's why they set these orders and even these child protection cases. It's because it's all about the money, and they don't really want your money. They just don't want you to have it, because they know that you'll have some freedom to move and some latitude. So if they have that form of coercive control, which is the most abusive thing in our Domestic Violence Act, the Violence Against Women, which is another Minnesota staple that we've unleashed upon the world, but the Duluth model is horrible, because it just looks at the entire premise of protection under the guise of abusive men, female and children victims, and it's a super juggernaut that they use to just drive that wedge. And now it's used to take your gun rights. It's used to infringe upon any number of rights that you would enjoy otherwise, and that's whether you're a man or a woman. And you keep control of the children, you have control of both parents and the finances. So
Yeah.
Hey, Jason, I have a question for you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because we're moving towards the end of the show.
Sorry.
Jason, for the people that are watching this evening, and the people that will watch as this video lives, forever on social media, what's the one thing, the most important thing you can tell a parent who's just getting involved in this system?
Well, the one that I see is, when I ask that question in my group, it's, what do you wish you knew? And people say their rights, and I say that's kind of a misnomer. I think that it's not enough to know what your rights are in theory, but you have to be able to assert your rights timely. You have to know that the people that are talking to you don't have any sway or authority over you if that is not a signed warrant. If it's not dated yesterday or today, then it's not an emergency. If it's a month ago, that your rights are right there in ink sometimes, and you need to know that it's a very subtle and it's a very deceptive way that they do deviate you off onto that course. And if you don't have a modicum of diligence and a great deal of fortitude, you're not going to be able to assert those rights timely. And if you don't do that, then you won't have a case. It's hard to explain, because I'm not a legal professional, but I've kind of come halfway to that understanding where people kind of fall off, and that's where they just don't realize why things still happen the way they do in the legal system. And they're at a loss. But there's a point there where we have to take responsibility for who we are. We have to take our rights, and we have to know them. And back when the Constitution was written, just about everybody could tell you their rights, cite and verse, and they could just tell you. And that's sadly not something we teach in our schools. We say, yeah, there's a Bill of Rights, but do we actually say what those rights are? Do we actually go into any case law while you're in school? Do you understand what the most recent case says about what your rights are? And that's what you need to put your attention on if you have this fight. And remember that if they're at your door without a warrant, they don't belong there. If you don't want them there, they don't have to be there, and you can send them packing, and unpolitely if you'd want to. That's on you, but you might incur their wrath in the future.
Yeah, but when you say that and people do that, they actually bring the police.
Yep.
Actually bring 5 officers. I have seen it on video. 5 officers to break the door.
Yep. And that's when you have to comply, but comply in resistance, because you have to comply and say, you know what, I don't agree with this, I do not consent to this, and you have to make that known and be recording, and you have to know that your rights to record are just as prevalent as the officers in their body cams. You have the right to your sanctity in your home, and when that's violated, it's violated illegally without a warrant that's dated, and if they go back and get that warrant and it's got information in there that's not true, then those people are under oath, and that's when you get them. You don't, and I say this in my group, don't keep the record honest, and then the rest of it will follow. If you keep that record honest and you make them stay honest in that record, then you can always go back to that. Like he said, this will be here on the internet in perpetuity. Well, so is that record. It's supposed to be. And when you keep that record honest, you can go back to that and say, no, this is not what they said when they removed my child. This is what they said on video, and this is what they say here in your report. Now, this information wasn't available to them at the time that they asked for that warrant. It wasn't available until after. So either they're creating this petition out of false narratives, or they're creating it out of evidence gathered after the fact in a manner that's not really coherent. It's not cohesive with the law. It's not legal. So maybe we should probably rethink this. And the people that said this at the time, they were obviously fabricating whatever they said. So that's when you hold them accountable financially. And although that's only part of how we're going to work on this, it's never worked before, because these counties, especially in LA and in California, they paid hundreds of millions of dollars out to these parents, and then the next day they're doing the very same thing. It's because the system is designed to be broken. It's designed to be, because basically they're going to catch more fish than they're ever going to have to release. That'll go stinky before they have to release them.
And they usually target foster kids too when they grow out of the system and they have their own family and they get pregnant and have kids. They actually go to the hospital and remove the children from them because they were previous foster kids.
Right.
So you're going to ruin the children for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And that's why, a lot of foster kids, when they get out of when they grow out of the system, they did a study. They said 92% or 82%, I can't remember the number, but it's high, in the 80s or 90s of them are in jail.
Yep.
In jail.
Right.
Because they literally destroy the child's psyche.
Right.
They never function the same.
Right, and there's an abuse that happens even to the parents as well. You're right on the money, and there's a part of this that when these parents are going before the court in their initial hearings, that's something that they're also not aware of. But they're not only missing their children, and there's a separation there, but there's a syndrome, or there's something wrong with these parents because they're not able to be present in that moment, because they're in that fight or flight response, but it's a never-ending kind of circuit for them that they cannot snap, because their brain is telling them that their children are in danger, and they're not really able to be present to make that argument or to assert their rights. And there's a kind of a disconnect with that. And I think that's part of the reason that it's easy to prey on these families, because even well-rounded, intelligent individuals can find themselves fall prey. Attorneys can find themselves fall prey to these CPS people when they come to the door, because they're in that shock mode, and there's something else that happens here, and it's part of the physical human response that we're missing, and I think it needs to be studied. It's not just a legal abuse syndrome, that's part of it, but there's more to the fight or flight response here when it's regarding your children. And I think I remembered that there was a point in my early case where I was just numb and I wasn't seeing what they were saying. I wasn't able to process it in that real time.
Right? Yeah, you like in the twilight zone. People are there, present, but you're present, but you're not present.
Right.
You don't know what the hell just happened.
Right.
Your mind's fogged, and then they slam accusations against you that never happened. Never happened. But
They said the child said this. Yep.
Absolutely.
Jason, we've gone over time tonight. I want to, first of all, I want to welcome or invite you back.
Thank you.
You are a wealth of knowledge. And it's clear to me that you've given this a lot of thought, and you've taught yourself a lot more than the average, person. So please consider coming back on the show. We're on 7 days a week, Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. and then Saturdays and Sundays at 9 a.m.
Come tomorrow, Jason. Come tomorrow.
I'd like to. Yeah.
Right. So I'll
will you
have
folks check out my page?
I'll have Miss G or our producer Grace contact you.
I'll contact you.
I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank my special guests, Miss G, Mr. Jason, and of course Cassandra. We seem to have lost Cassandra during the stream. But good night, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Jason.
Yep. Good night.